All right. So, hi everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the second panel of our workshop on the financialization of nature, green investment, and biodiversity conservation. And this panel would be this morning panel would be about the Belt and Road Initiative. So, my name is Daniele Brombal, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the workshop, together with Dr. Giulia Dal Maso and PhD candidate and ICCA Consortium member Ali Razmkhah, who are here also today. And I'm going to moderate today's panel together with the research fellow Melman Tsui, who is also a PhD candidate at the University of Lisbon. So in the panel of yesterday, so the first panel of this workshop, we have been looking into the status and the challenges of green finance, both from a, so to speak, technical perspective, but also from an ethical and political point of view, including also the engagement of local communities. And so yesterday's panel basically has laid the ground for today's panel. Both this one and the next one we are going to have at 11:15 this morning, where we are going to zoom in into specific cases and the concrete implications of green finance, basically. So the first panel, and the one which is going to start right in a couple of minutes, is about the nexus between finance, infrastructures, and people, and nature, of course. And we are going to look into this by focusing on the case of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a Chinese-led initiative, which is implying huge investments in terms of infrastructures. And well, the second panel we are going to have today, later on this morning at 11:15, has been organized in connection and co-organized with the ICCA Consortium, which is doing a lot of work in trying to empower indigenous peoples and local communities who care for their territories and their environment. And that panel is going to give voice to the concerns of these communities, and hopefully share a little bit about pathways to improve things in a way. So today's panel is going to basically reflect these two main components we have in the workshop. So on the one hand, trying to understand a little bit more how green finance work and what the concrete implications of what is ongoing there right now, and at the same time trying to sharpen a little bit the critical edge to it in order to find ways to improve it, basically, or to try to understand how it can actually get positive outcomes. So to do so, we are going to have four panelists who we have invited to do so, and so I'm very glad to welcome them here today. We're going to start with Christoph Nedopil from the Green Finance and Development Center of Fudan University. And Christoph has been doing a lot of work on these aspects in the last few years, and so he's a very important voice also in the debate about that. And we are very happy to have him here today. We are also super happy to have Dr. Zhang Jianyu from the Belt and Road Initiative Green Development Institute, who is also going to share a little bit more about about green finance and the different facets of it along the Belt and Road Initiative. And so welcome also to Jianyu here today. Then we're going to have presentations by Elia Apostolopoulou from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and Elia is providing a more, let's say, political ecology perspective, I would say, on the issue. And if I remember correctly, but then Elia, probably you can correct me if I'm wrong, you have been now moving to a new research group in Barcelona, so maybe you can introduce that as well at the beginning. And then finally, we're going to have the last presentation with Eugene Simonov, who is an old friend who contributed a lot in the past to the work we've been doing in pre-COVID times, in the work we have been doing in Venice, trying to understand more about the implications of the Belt and Road for sustainability and for people and nature, basically. And Eugene Simonov is founder of River Without Boundaries Coalition, and he's currently in Canberra at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of New South Wales. And I'm very grateful to him also because he is now having his second COVID if I remember correctly, right, Eugene? So thank you so much for being with us today. All right. So just a few specifics about the way we are going to have also the discussion. And I'm going to leave just the floor to Memman in a minute. So we're going to have first the presentations, which are going to be 15 minutes each. And I will also help the speakers to keep the time if needed. And then we are going to have right after the presentations a discussion. And Memman is going to tell you a little bit more how participants can take part in today. So Memman, I can leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Danielle. So basically, we're going to use this online tool called Flinga. Let me share my screen so you can see how it works. It's very, very easy. So I will share the link in the chat box so everyone has access to it. It looks like this. And on the upper right-hand corner where it says message, this is where you can put in your question. So let me just put in the test question. And then it would appear here in a color box. And you can also change the color. And this, I will try to cluster the different questions into categories. And also here's a like button. If you have a similar question to someone's question that's already been asked, you can also choose to just click on here. And then we would know that this question is getting a lot of traction. So basically, this is how it's going to work. I would prefer that you don't keep changing the color because I will try to use color coding to cluster them. So that would be appreciated. And I'm going to share this link right now so everyone can try it. Hold on, here we go, the chat box. And if you do have trouble accessing it, or if you just don't want to struggle between the screens, feel free to also post your questions in the chat box and I will manually transfer them onto Flinga. So that's how the question part will work. All right.
So thank you so much, Memman. And so hopefully in this way we have a canvas of different questions, and so we will able to have a more lively discussion at the end of the panel. And it's also useful for us then to conserve this. Otherwise, sometimes things get lost in the chat. All right. So I think without further ado, we can now leave the floor to the panelists, and we're going to start, as said, with Christoph. And Christoph, if you want, you may share the screen.
Wonderful.
And, yeah.
Thanks so much, Daniele, for the kind introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be here on this wonderful morning, I hope, in Italy, afternoon in China. And I am actually on all the other side after somehow managing to leave Shanghai, which is in a very difficult situation these days. So I'm in California right now, and it's 12 a.m. So don't quote me on everything. I might be too tired to express myself 100% correctly. But no, great pleasure to be here, and also to see some old friends here, particularly also Chiang. I was just with him on a discussion, I think 2 days ago for the BRIGC. So I will share my screen and hope you can see it.
Yeah,
I guess it works. It looks like it's working. Wonderful. So I will use my next 15 minutes not only to talk about what we're doing and who I am, but let me use this quick opportunity to make a short introduction about myself. So I'm Christoph Niedupil-Wang. I'm an associate professor of economics at the Fanhai International School of Finance at Fudan University, and where I'm also leading the Green Finance and Development Center. I also have some positions in Singapore, also at another university in Beijing. I'm an advisor to the BRI Green Development Coalition, a consultant for the Asian Development Bank, and luckily I'm also working with the G20, which is very, very interesting. And now kind of very briefly on the Green Finance and Development Center, we have 4 different labs that we work in. The number one is the Green BRI Lab, which is of course a lot of the work that I did before at the Green BRI Center in Beijing. So there's a lot of continuation of the work. Green Innovation Finance Lab, how do we actually scale up a lot of the innovation in the transport, in the energy, in the food sector to have a sustainable future? The ESG Lab, much on risk management, and the Biodiversity Finance Lab, which is just such a new topic in green finance, old topic in many ways to protect biodiversity, but to understand biodiversity risks for financial institutions and biodiversity opportunities is definitely something new that we're all trying to wrap our head around. Now, I think the Belt and Road Initiative, I don't have to introduce the Belt and Road Initiative. I believe that all of you are absolute experts. There are many maps. This is just one map. It's never a complete map. It's a vague concept that is being, of course, it's changing and evolving all the time. So this is just a simple map that shows you one depiction of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think what's interesting to understand is kind of course, where are kind of the main investments going in terms of, or main financial engagement of China in the Belt and Road Initiative. And so every half year we publish the BRI investment report. Our last one was published in January for the year 2013 to 2021. So with the newest data. And this is important to understand, of course, also which sectors contribute most to the growth of the BRI, but also to understand which sectors we have to address if we want to look at kind of the financialization of nature, or kind of which nature risks are coming from specific sectors. And what's interesting there at the bottom right, the cumulative Chinese BRI engagements in different sectors, that of course energy and transport, so really the core infrastructure engagement of China is the most prevalent, about 65% of all of the Chinese engagement. Now, we understand that energy and transport are, of course, not only contributors to climate emissions, but also the main contributors, or some of the main contributors to the loss of biodiversity. So these are two very, very important sectors that we have to kind of take into consideration when we want to understand how to do financialization of nature. That's a hard word to say all the time. Particularly energy sector. Particularly in the energy sector, it's very interesting what has been happening over the last years. Here you see the engagement of China in the different types of energy, the different subsectors: coal, oil, gas, hydro, and solar, wind. And really great development over the last 2 years in particular, that in 2020, we saw a majority of non-fossil fuel engagement of China. So that was the first time that made headlines. And then in 2021, we of course did not see any more coal investments. And that in some ways comes earlier than the announcement of President Xi. That was in September 2021, but actually all of 2021, we did not see real coal engagement of China. Even more positive if we only look at investments. So here we have both the construction engagement and the investments together in this graph. If we only look at investments, actually, there were no fossil investments in all of 2021. So there is a really good trend in terms of greening the BRI in some regards. In other regards, particularly in fossil engagement, we have seen some back and forth. And actually also in 2022, we already saw some more, particularly gas and oil engagement of Chinese participants. Now, we also understand that the current trends of the BRI have some risks for the environment. Here we talk about the climate. This is a study done by Ma Jun and Simon Sadek in 2019, which was very interesting, that showed kind of on the left side, you see the overall impact in 4 different scenarios. So the business as usual BAO scenario, that's the orange line, and then the worst in class scenario, that's the brown line, and the green line, which is the best in class scenario. But we actually need to go to the yellow line, the 2DS, the 2 degrees scenario pathway. And then we can, again, it's very interesting, transport and power as the main sectors of the BRI engagement. We see that in the power sector, we can reach almost with the best in class, the 2 degree scenario, whereas in the transport sector, we are struggling massively to reach the 2 degree scenario. So in terms of climate impact, we're still working very hard to address the climate issue. there are a lot of opportunities, but there are also challenges. In terms of biodiversity, I guess many of you have seen this graph before, that the BRI corridors overlap with a number of threatened species. And there were, of course, important cases like the Indonesian hydropower plant, but also others that really infringed on some very protected species. And so there's a lot of questions, particularly in the linear infrastructure space, so roads, railway, transmission lines, how they impact biodiversity. And here just kind of to understand that linear infrastructure, hydro dams, power generation, mining, so they kind of really lead to a number of different environmental risks like deforestation, flooding, river temperature increases, loss of natural resources, and so on. And so these are risks that we try to identify, but then also see how we can financialize them, how do we put a monetary value on them. Now, that slide never stays. But of course, President Xi has announced to build a green BRI. So this is kind of important to understand. If it's not only the financialization of nature that drives green behavior, particularly of Chinese financial institutions, but it's the top level policy signals that matter. So if President Xi says we want to do a green BRI, it is in many ways more powerful than if we, from a financial risk perspective, only talk about environmental risks. There's a lot of top-down guidance. This is the governance structure. How do we actually make investment decisions in the BRI? And there are a host of different governments, institutions, and government regulators involved, in particularly the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, Ministry of Commerce, SASAC, so that's particularly for SOE investments, the Banking Regulatory Commission, Ministry of Finance. And so there's all these regulators. So for us, trying to green the BRI and trying to understand how can we put risks on kind of nature loss and money on nature gain, we have to work with these different regulators to really understand kind of how can we, who's responsible for what. And therefore also kind of how can we increase risk and decrease risk recognition, decrease the actual risk exposure. On the right side, you see a flow chart that was published also in one of our studies to understand kind of particularly how SOEs and private companies have different decision-making processes and gatekeepers with whom we then have to work in order to avoid nature risks. Now, what's also very interesting is that the Chinese regulators have moved to actually demanding more green over the last 10 years. So here we see a timeline from 2012 to 2022 with the different regulators. So State Council, again, NDRC, MOFCOM, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Ecology and Environment, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the People's Bank of China, the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission. So all the relevant regulators. And you see kind of over time, the different opinions, guidances, visions, and how they approached green. They all have green in their name. But for a long time, green was understood as long as you apply host country rules, you're green. So as long as you are using the rules of any of the BRI countries, we are fine. We don't care about any more environmental risks. And that was actually really the practice, and continues in many ways to be the practice still. As long as we have the local laws in place and kind of adhere to the local laws, it's sufficient. Now, we of course know that a lot of the BRI countries' institutional environment is not very good. It's just a matter of fact. There are a lot of developing countries that have very challenging institutional settings. So in 2020 to 22, we saw this great change of mind that the ministries came out with more guidances that stipulated the use of international or Chinese standards for overseas investments and cooperation. And most aggressively, actually, just 2 weeks ago, 4 ministries issued the guidelines on joint implementation of green development in the BRI. We wrote about this if you want to know more about, also on several mediums on this, because it is actually a really important guideline that really shows us what are some of the expectations going forward to green the BRI. And a lot of the work is supported by different initiatives and drivers for greening the BRI. So the BRI Green Development Coalition under the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, I think it's actually by now 11 working groups, brings out a number of different studies to understand aspects of biodiversity, ecosystems, green finance and investments, green technology, sustainable transport. And so all these groups are working very kind of with international and Chinese stakeholders to understand what are important practices, what is the reality on the ground to drive forward a green development. You also have the Green Finance Committee, which is the official committee of all the green finance institutions, many of the green finance institutions in China, including the financial sector, that also brings forward ideas how to accelerate green finance in China. You have the CCICD, which is the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, that provides a number of special policy studies also on greening the BRI. And then you have other outside events like the CDB COP in Kunming, now going into the 3rd year, and of course also G20, where China is also very strongly engaged. And here, one of the works I think that was very successful and hopefully also influential, which was the traffic light system, which was published in December 2020 by the BRIGC, that had very clear 9 recommendations plus this traffic light system to put all projects into a red, yellow, and green category, depending on their environmental impact. And that is very much modeled, of course, on international studies, while taking into account the reality of China, now, of course, having more Chinese characteristics. But this traffic light system, or the green development guidance, now goes into the 3rd year to really move forward and apply the concepts of it. And a number of actually other infrastructure standards have been using parts of the traffic light system, including fast infra SI. So it was in many ways a very innovative concept that we developed for the BRIGC. Then there's also the green investment principles, which you might have heard of, 7 principles signed by, I think, 27 global financial institutions, becoming more. It is a good framework. It is so far lagging behind very strongly compared to international standards like the Equator Principles, in particular that focuses also on project finance. But it's nevertheless an important step because it involves the Chinese financial institutions much more. We published a study just in January, really working with the green investment principles and the BRIGC to bring the GIP, the green investment principles, and the green development guidance closer together, and also show the complementarity of the 2 systems. Because in the end, what's interesting, and this is in many ways, I think, a reality for China, you have a lot of it's a huge country, a lot of different regulators and a lot of different ideas, and sometimes they're perfectly aligned and sometimes they're not so much aligned, and particularly also in the green financial system. And so this work was very important in terms of showing how the GIP and the green development guidance are actually addressing similar things, often overlapping things, but are actually in many ways complementary. So that also drives the green investment principles much more bottom up with the financial institutions, and the BRIGC kind of with multi-stakeholder engagement and government support. With that, I think I used pretty much my 15 minutes, but this was just a teaser, and hope we can have a great discussion about kind of where we go with the green BI, and also more on financial instruments. I think there's a lot more I could have shared with you all.
Thank you so much, Christoph. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have the possibility to do that also during discussion. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. We now leave the floor to Dr. Zhang Jianyu. Right, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it very clearly.
Great, all set. And I have started my timer, so I'm all set. Well, thank you very much for the invitation that went through the UNDP Beijing office here. And I am really honored and also super happy to have my friend and colleague Christopher just present to you the macro concept of BRI and also many of the projects that he's involved. So I hope some of my presentation won't be redundant. Definitely going to see some similar slides, but let me try to tell you sort of a step forward in terms of the story of the Green BRI. Well, my name is Zhang Jianyu. I'm the executive director of the it's called the Green BRI Institute, which basically serves as the secretariat for BRI GC, BRI International Green Development Coalition, which I'm going to present it in a minute. So basically, we have been thinking a lot with regard to the theoretical basis, the theoretical sort of rationale for the Green BRI. And at least I have, heard it or been thinking about from two sort of perspectives. Sorry, you may hear my cat sort of.
It's fine.
Want to join the talk, but so one is this whole thing of you may heard of the it's called Kinderberg Trap, right? So which is the sort of the other side of the subsidies trap that a rising basically the chaos is rooted in a rising new global power that did not provide sufficient public good, so that we have basically what the work we are having right now. So that's one school sort of thinking, and the other one, the other school of thinking is this sort of comes from the sort of multilateral collaboration, bilateral collaboration, and some people think the BRI could be a polylateral sort of type of cooperation that was sort of China playing a significant role and try to sort of push the agenda. But I think my thinking, that's why I'm presenting this slide, is we need to really go back to why we're doing all this. We want to. I mean, last time I checked, we still uphold the 17 goals for the SDG that we need to achieve by 2030. Unfortunately, not many people talk about that anymore. I would call it both from the left and right. I mean, certainly the right, they probably never really honored the SDG goals from the beginning. But even for the left, that people start to really pay more attention to what I call the peculiar issues, right? Climate change, biodiversity, and even in climate change these days, if you're familiar with the field, that people start to zoom in into some very specific issues like methane emission, things of that sort. But I think we really need to go back to the sort and honor the generations before us, literally starting from 50 years ago. 1972, when the Earth chapter was proclaimed, and then throughout the years. 1972, the Rio meeting, and then the 2002, the Johannesburg meeting, and 2022, the Back to Rio meeting. So I think that at least one route that I'm searching for to put where the Green BRI is really go to help to achieve the SDG goals. And I think we need to recognize, and the UN recognize, that the current global effort, collective effort, is definitely far from sufficient. And I think that's at least one justification, which I see is why the concept of the Green BRI was born. I think certainly, as Christopher has already outlined to you, there's sort of opportunities and challenges for the Green BRI, which I'm going to just use that as the acronym. It's easier. With all the issues, energy. I think you have all seen the report that was the current. I mean, certainly, I think people have not really sort of updated these figures in the post-COVID or in the post sort of a war that's going on right now. But last time I checked, I mean, I think if you add all the efforts together, we're far from, achieving the 2-degree goal, let alone the 1.5-degree goals, and the biodiversity crisis that we're facing. And these are certainly you can call them challenges, but I call them opportunities that for the globe to cooperate. But very, very happily that we be able to see that some people are trying to convert those risks, deficiencies into opportunities. And Christopher has already outlined the effort that China's government has underway. I mean, first China announced they're going to achieve peaking and carbon neutrality, respectively, by 2030 and 2060. Last year, President Xi announced that China is no longer building coal-fired power plants overseas, which Christopher has shown you the figure that actually the actual activity started stopping building coal-fired power plants overseas even before the announcements was made. But what is not so sort of a really being put attention to is actually what President Xi announced, or two things. He put the announcement actually in one sentence. The first half of the sentence is to help developing countries to build green and low carbon energy systems. And the second half was stop building coal-fired power plants overseas. So lots of people in the first half was actually overlooked. But the recent survey that was done was, Chinese investors and financiers, you will see it's great interest. I mean, great momentum, motivation in people's mind, in terms of doing renewables. I'm just using this as one example, talking about, the opportunities as sort of facing. Challenges, certainly, Christopher has mentioned, I think the biodiversity challenges we're facing in the 6 corridors of BRI, the energy and climate crisis we're all facing far away from 2 degree. And also, I think we need to recognize under the new sort of post-pandemic, post-war, if we be able to have a post-war scenario, I think the challenges will just be graver. Some people say, it put us more, give us more motivation to seek energy independence. Renewable is one solution to that. But I think what you look at in the reality is on the contrary, is people are building more LNG ports, and every country is digging into their own pocket to find whatever the energy they can find. I just recently read an article talking about this war on coal, which you never imagine will happen again, but it's coming. So I think these are definitely the challenges we're facing. But how to overcome them, particularly in the field of renewables, is definitely something very imminent. And these are environment has become a major issues of grievance going toward all the MDBs, right? And if you go to specific countries, every country has their own very specific challenges. Regardless is implementation of the power purchasing agreement. Great. We just had a meeting from the Green BRI 2 days ago, and one of the biggest challenges identified, surprisingly by people, is not finance, it's the grid. They just don't have the grid to connect all the renewables that's going to be developed. So we need to manage the balance between people's desire, which is arguably leveling up because of internet and because the public awareness and attention to the issue. But on the other side is the different development stage of the respective country are, and really how to be able to do that. It was mentioned that I think one of the great effort the Chinese government has put into place, in addition to the major efforts, is this BRIGC, BRI International Green Development Coalition, in which I serve. And the goal is really trying to develop a coalition that can facilitate many of the challenges and deficiencies that I just mentioned. One thing I really want to mention is that the BRGC has developed and partners of more than 40 countries, more than 150 international organizations, companies, coalitions. So it's for real. I mean, we're really trying to develop a mechanism that trying to tackle this issue that arguably I think has not been, people have been searching for the solution for a long time. Crystal mentioned about the semantic partnerships. I listed them here again. But the point here is, I mentioned about left and right, is I don't think just zooming into climate issues at what the global effort is seemingly trying to do will be sufficient to solve this problem. You really need to look at the issues in its entirety. Sorry, that's the tail of my cat, who's really trying to join the discussion. The thing is, I think my argument would be, if you only focus on climate-related issues, renewables, or you only focus on biodiversity, that won't be sufficient. You need to take an integrated, holistic approach, and that's what this 10 semantic partnerships are for. Are really trying to look at issues in its totality and try to see what we can do to find a solution. I mentioned that the great thing about the coalition is, as all, not just the Chinese government, certainly Chinese government is supporting this, but it's going to be an international organization just happened to register in China that has all these partners, the logos that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, all the international organizations for people who really seriously want to do this. So I know I take a little more time, but I want to be one of the things that we're doing is this sort of a pathway on help with the Green BRI energy and low carbon development. And the framework that we have put forward are the following: the technical cooperation, the guiding the real financial resources, and also enhancing international BRI cooperation. But let me just walk you through a little bit. The first, we think one thing is really important is to develop technological cooperation, because China arguably has accumulated lots of these experiences through the past 20 years, but particularly the last 5 years in terms of the transition, energy transition, from fossil fuel based to renewables. And internationally, if you look at the sort of global South-South collaboration, that has also become something that's getting more attention. If you have been to Glasgow, you will be really impressed with all the initiatives that was announced. As I recall, the Netherlands has cooperation with the Indonesia on how to phase out their coal-fired, power capabilities. Denmark is working with India, something like that. So I think what we're trying to say is we need to explore all of them, regardless is either it's triangular, sort of North-South-South collaboration, or new form of South-South collaboration, or policy dialogue or capacity building. But we want to emphasize you need to be able to do whatever you can to figure out the technical solutions, before the finance kicks in. So finance is important. Crystal has talked many about that. I'm not going to repeat. GIP, TCFD, all the global sort of the taxonomies has been issued. But I think one thing I want to emphasize is we need to here, there's really opportunity. CICC, the China's largest investment bank, has recently has a report identified the opportunity, the investment needs in just in Africa is $5.7 trillion. And we need to find whatever the source that we have to be able to come up with those resources. And here's the issue. I think one buzzword that I've been using a lot these days is blended funding. We need to be able to tackle the funding from MDBs, bilaterals, private investors, and even VCs and all of the other type of innovative funding sources. Here I want to also, identify that, it's really a format that China has lots of experience on. It is whole thing about PPP, the public-private partnership that can really use to coordinate and to expand the credit space so as to help the renewables to develop. I'm not going to sort of repeat, go into detail some of these sort of specific challenges and examples, but just to sort of give you the sense. And then there's the sort of strengthen global collaboration, and the angles we have identified. They are from the global development perspective, from the realistic perspective, and also from a specific BRI perspective. We need to get people to be bold, which has been sort of strongly supported by the Secretary General of the UN. If you look at even his most recent speech after the promulgation of the ICCA report, that I think we have this Secretary General of the UN that really emphasized, and he really believes in this imminent global crisis. But also we need to be realistic, and I think there are big challenges I mentioned earlier, the reality that we're facing, the post-pandemic, the post-war scenario, that everybody is seeking both their own energy independence, find whatever they can find, but also, this global sort of trend of going green low, and how to balance that, and how to pace that, I think it's become something really significant. And also the BRI perspective, that how we can sort of use what the initiatives China has already started, and trying to really work hand in hand with our partners in the BRI countries. So it's not going to be just a one country issue, it's not just a BRI issue, but also becomes a sort of global issues. With that, I conclude my presentation, but just to say that BRIGC will be open to everyone and accessible to everyone, and look forward to cooperation and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for this insightful presentation as well. After listening, looking at your presentation, I would like probably to suggest a change in the order of the other two presentations is for Eugene and Elia is better, because I think this last thing especially resonates with what Eugene has to share. So Eugene, if it would be good for you to introduce yours right now.
No problem.
Thank you. And Elia, I guess also. And okay, so probably it works better this way. So the floor is yours.
Okay.
Eugene. Thank you.
Is it okay? Am I sharing? Oh, how do I?
You're sharing the screen.
Second. I'm sharing the screen, but I don't see the means to remove it. What? Sorry.
Don't worry.
Something is preventing me from moving the slides, which is.
You can try again, and
yes, I will. Just.
If it is not working, then I can do that for you. But you can just try another time, and if it is not really working,
Eugene, my suggestion is just not to use the presentation mode. Just sort of open on the desktop. And just
but I have some sort of. Oops. Am I still sharing? No, I'm not sharing now. Yeah.
No.
Okay, a sec.
Let me see.
A second.
It's okay. We have a little bit of buffer when it comes to timing, so it's okay.
Okay, share.
And before you start, I would just like to, yeah, we can see that. Now we can see it, Eugene. We can see the.
Yeah, but okay, fine. I can move it this way, but wait a second. Oh, it works. So
yeah, yeah, it is.
So what I'm going to talk about is more related to my work as environmental activist rather than my work as environmental scientist, because my work as environmental scientist is more or less confined to river basin management and assessments of transboundary conservation and transboundary infrastructure systems. But as in activist capacity, I have been relatively active in helping grassroots NGOs and communities to understand what it is the Belt and Road and how to deal with this new beast. This is more or less my story of what I observed and learned as an activist. Also, I have to warn you that whatever you hear from the point of view of Putin's government is a material created and distributed by a foreign media outlet performing functions of the foreign agent. I'm the first environmentalist recognized as foreign agent in Russia. And I have legally to make this disclaimer at any public meeting. When the Belt and Road Initiative was declared, it was already more or less clear that it has a potential to be the largest development scheme we've ever seen designed by a single country to expand its influence. Slowly we were to learn that it basically lacks collective international governance mechanisms, although it has a great number of countries and institutions participating. From environmental perspective, it was crystal clear from the beginning that the thing is inherently non-sustainable because it's notoriously top-down and puts a great emphasis on development of infrastructure, basically for the sake of having infrastructure without due analysis of alternatives and safeguards considered proper by other international institutions. By 2022, the additional effect of this rather successful economic push was that many other competing countries started designing their own BRI-like initiatives. And now this construct is tested by a war, which has a potential to be a third world war. And it is very interesting how it will survive this stage. So from the very beginning, on the beginning of times, before the 2013, we were as NGO community, as civil society, more or less involved in resisting the prevailing Western multilateral bank system, which didn't want to change quick, trying to understand what to do with sustainable development goals, which are clearly an unrealistic way of planning the development. And seeing that planetary limits become palpable. Above that, we were exposed to greater influence of China going global in rather haphazard and anti-environmental manner. And as early as 2010, for example, in Russia, we had to put together the whole relatively comprehensive review of what is happening with environmental risk and Sino-Russian cooperation, transboundary cooperation in all sectors of cooperation available at that time. And it's a very interesting baseline document to date because it documents pre-BRI situation in environmental risks and nature resources related projects uniting two countries. And finally, we were still facing the development of global capitalism, which was definitely resisting change, and still had no feasible development alternative. And then the great scheme of Belt and Road came, which promoted system in times of relative chaos. Yes, it had weak environmental safeguards at the beginning, but it had a grand vision of uniting various aspects of development. It had lack of public participation, but that's what we hope to mend. And it created potentially healthy competition with the existing development mode because it promised some alternative approaches. Therefore, as environmental community consisting of Russian groups, Central Asian groups, American groups, Southeast Asian groups, there are many of us from different parts of the globe. We were trying to develop some approaches on how to position ourselves vis-a-vis this new development machine. First of all, we created something called Green Silk Road Initiative Coalition and Declaration, which was a beginning. It came from a conference in Moscow where we tried to analyze what is happening and how NGOs can participate in that and put together some programmatic approach on how to approach that. In 2017, we were very active, and after 2017, attempting to monitor implementation and put to good use the first guidance and action plan for a green BRI. At the same time, we were trying to get access to databases where presumably the institutions planning BRI were collecting the big data on all aspects of development and trying to analyze it to make this development more coherent with and take into account various factors. We failed on that. We never got access to those databases. And actually, in many fields, we now doubt they actually ever existed. We had, at least my group and several allies, a big failed attempt to promote cross-boundary networks of protected areas, which were written in the 2017 action plan. And we came not empty-handed, we came with the actual solid bilateral work called Sino-Russian Strategy for Transboundary Networks of Protected Areas in Amur River Basin, which was signed by 2 countries and had some initial implementation plan and actually stalled in the era of Green BRI. But it was rather successful for the first several years. So what we succeeded in, we educated civil society on new risks and ways to confront them. We collected evidence on regular violations of declared green policies and mechanisms behind it. We had some communication with China-led international financial institutions on safeguards, social, environmental, and governance, similar as it was with the multilateral development banks of the past, of the older generation, but sort of in a less structured dialogue. And some of us even got nominal membership in BRICS and similar bodies which are trying to promote, to work as platforms alongside the China government to promote international image of Green BRI. We didn't have success in establishing real dialogue on green development on a programmatic level. In other words, all attempts, for example, to find a place and try to contribute to sustainable planning of corridors as opposed to projects, or of some larger schemes that incorporate various aspects of sustainable development into development scheme, which would guide the implementation of specific projects. This was not particularly successful. At least in my experience, the failure was with the Russian-China-Mongolia economic corridor, which even had an environmental part in the action plan, which absolutely is disjunct from the actual development plan. Other colleagues failed in other regions. We realized that we don't see the actual machine for implementation of Green BRI, which was built since 2017. Partly it could be attributed to a reform of the government 2018, which created certain discontinuity. And we really failed to use BRI to expand cooperation between NGOs in China and BRI countries at the grassroots level. To this point, I believe it was due to the fact that Belt and Road Initiative actually never had coherent implementation mechanism, which would have, it's a very loose construct, as was mentioned today. And therefore, as it goes, it doesn't have enough feedback loops evaluating the quality of development it produces. It does have some loops, but they are insufficient for the proactive planning. Environmental protection sustainability was obviously not among core objectives in initial stages of One Belt and Road, and was added since, but never really integrated as core priority until very recent times. And growing authoritarian tendencies in governance and relative suppression of civil society in China hindered improvements in many fields, including the interaction between civil society and Belt and Road Initiative. Nevertheless, most conservation groups and the local civil society movements, whom I know, evaluated there is some progress compared with previous period, that still there is a progress in terms of greater sustainability and greater greater responsiveness, at least to environmental and social social concerns on the ground from China-led investment. Ever since, and in parallel, the civil society groups were rather more, I would say, successful dealing with the specific projects than dealing with any constructs above those projects, programs or corridors or whatever is other sort of manifestations of BRI. When there was, and one of the examples of such work was the response of a huge number of civil society groups to the call of the Ministry of Commerce to fund high quality projects for post-COVID recovery. Basically, there was a letter in which we suggested our own vision of what are the essential qualities of quality projects, and submitted to a number of institutions leading BRI investment along with China Ministry of Commerce, and also compiled an exemplary list of 60 projects which are bad by these standards and should be discontinued or radically reshuffled, and explained why, and also widely sort of distributed among various audiences as an illustration. This is just an illustration what qualities of these projects were specifically worrying to us. And we are yet to trace what happens to each one. So not to each one. We know the fate of many of them. Many of them were actually discontinued by various reasons, or stalled. But still we want to trace what was the dynamics 4 or 5 years after for all 60 of them. Another, and this is much closer to my professional field, another very important observations came from our work on hydropower. As you understand, the dam-based hydropower is the classic sort of case of financialization of nature, when a big firm comes and basically privatizes the major asset, natural asset, a river, and drastically changes the natural processes and related well-being of communities which depend on these natural processes in a river, creating completely new technological environment and completely new balance of power. In most cases, it has a very serious detrimental consequences for nature and people around. In the BRI period, surprisingly or not surprisingly, China, despite being the largest supplier of hydropower engineering in the world, slowed down its hydropower projects, both domestically and internationally, mainly due to new opportunities in development of other renewable energy sources. More than that, there were several regulations which called for a caution for engineering projects which constrain or change flow of transboundary rivers. But still, China promotes hydropower as its contribution to green development within the framework of Belt and Road Initiative on a very regular basis. And domestically, it's has somewhat improved attitude toward hydropower during last 2 years. And international organizations expect that China will remain the major provider and major fund investor in international hydropower projects in several key regions of the world. Statistically, the share of hydropower in China's overseas energy investments is far greater than in domestic or in overall renewable energy investment around the world. So basically, greater share goes to hydropower. Another trend that worries us very seriously, and we raised that as we were preparing a BRI manual for Friends of the Earth Asia, is that many other countries started their counter-BRI programs to compete with China for the allegiance and attention of the global South. Basically, there is a lot of similarity in such programs lately promoted by Japan, Australia, European Union, and a regional BRI, but they all promise better development standards. However, the main thing that they still often promote infrastructure and large-scale investments for the sake of infrastructure and large-scale investments, and have clearly politically driven background. So it's basically multiplies the pressure created by BRI by this additional BRI responsive programs. At the same time, a good sign is that at least multilateral development banks started cooperating with institutions promoting BRI in improving quality projects and trying to develop some kind of a co-development platforms for better quality development. Finally, there was a call, which I am yet to understand. It was very recently when the key officials in China called for a joint implementation of global development, which is a very, very hopeful sign. And many countries are in process of harmonizing their sustainable development taxonomies. So, in essence, although all these initiatives tend to claim they promote highest safeguards, they still follow a bias of large-scale infrastructure development as the way forward for major international investment, which has very huge environmental costs and often overlooks more important and less destructive alternatives. Now, all this construct is put to test.
Eugene, sorry, I hate to do this. I would like you to ask
sure.
you to.
Now, all this tested
yeah.
by war. And what is important to know that during the war, all sides are lowering their environmental requirements. Russia is massively dropping environmental requirements to many development processes. And it would be interesting to test the guidelines for green BRI. Will China, seeing Russia, its major partner in BRI, dropping environmental requirements and creating basically, will China insist on doing, in this case, lacking environmental procedures like environmental impact assessments of public participation procedures, according to the Chinese regulations as it's stipulated, or according to the best international regulations, as stipulated in the latest green development guidelines. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I'm sorry for pushing you a little bit at the end.
Yeah, fine.
And on this last note, actually, and the decline in standards, environmental standards, this is something we have been seeing a lot also in Italy, actually as a consequence of the post-COVID recovery policies. And so among civil society, there is a lot of, thing, because we have been really seeing a decline in, and the way environmental impact assessment is being done right now in Italy, it's really worrying a lot of people in the civil society, and there is always this justification. In our case, is the recovery plan for the economy post-COVID, and we can really see this happening. Also in this situation. So, but yeah, thank you for this. For your presentation, it was super insightful and a lot of material for the discussion. I think, and also a good way to to then transition to the last presentation by Elia, which in a way is going to complete a different spectrum of perceptions and possibilities about the Belt and Road Initiative and its implications, and so I will leave the floor to Elia to do this, and I would ask Eugene to stop your sharing, because I can still see yours on the screen, so we can let Elia. All right. Okay, and okay, the floor is yours, Elia. I will also help you keeping track of time if you need, so welcome again.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So can you see the presentation now?
Yeah, we can see the presentation, or we can hear your voice.
But it's not moving.
Yeah. And sorry, Elia, while you figure out this, I forgot to mention, because I see other people joined. So I'm going to repost the message by Maman about the platform we are using to sharing comments with the link. And if you cannot move, Elia, you may do as also Eugene and Jean done before.
Do you see the next slide or no?
No, we just see the first one. And
yeah,
so
I don't know why this is happening. Okay. So I won't
I think now
it's a
better.
PDF, right?
Yes.
Yeah, now we can see this moving.
Maybe just
you can see it now?
Yeah.
Now it is
Okay.
fine. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
All right.
Great. Okay, so so thank you also for the invitation. Dr. Elia Apostolopoulou, I'm a senior fellow at the University of Cambridge, at Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And I'm holding one of the Global Sustainability Fellowships of the University of Cambridge that is specifically focused on the Belt and Road Initiative. Yeah, as mentioned in the beginning, from September, I will be based in ICTA, in the Autonomous University of Barcelona, but still keeping my affiliation with the University of Cambridge, again as a senior fellow. So just to say as a very brief introduction that the last 3 years, I have been leading a research team exploring the implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative with a focus on tracing the links between the BRI, urban transformation, and inequality in several places across the global south and north. So the New Silk Road, China's Belt and Road Initiative, is the largest single infrastructure project since the Marshall Plan. And something that is really important here for my analysis is that it is widely considered an exemplar of a new type of infrastructure-led development of a scope and scale that actually has no precedent probably in modern history. It involves 140 countries and influences more than 65% of the world's population. So what we have been doing the last 3 years with my research team, by focusing, on the New Silk Road, is trying to explain and explore the role of the New Silk Road as a global agent of massive urban transformation. The key idea behind this is that the BRI, by combining large-scale infrastructure with industrial projects and major investments in the built environment, it actually transforms the places where BRI projects materialize to financial, tourist, and trade hubs. And this has so far profoundly changed both the rural and urban landscapes in these places. So this is these are some basic elements of the approach we follow that I consider really important in order to give you an idea of our project. And I will finish here with that and then go into more details on the environmental impacts of specific projects. So you can see here the approach that we are following. In a way, we are trying to combine the concerns of urban geography with urban political ecology, along with post-colonial geographies and debates on global urbanism, to achieve 3 agenda-setting shifts in scientific research on the Belt and Road Initiative. So the first shift is that we are trying in this project to respond to calls to move beyond treating northern urbanization as the norm. And we have introduced the novel concept of Silk Road urbanization in order to offer the first social science analysis of the transforming global geographies of the urban, in which China's geopolitical power becomes critical. Secondly, and this is the most relevant for our discussion today, I think, is that we are trying to bridge different traditions of geographical and political ecology research that seldom interact in order to offer a decolonial, grounded analysis of the interrelated impacts of Silk Road urbanization on space, lives, and socio-natures. And thirdly, at the core of our analysis, we have a radical reconceptualization of socio-environmental and socio-spatial transformation as a product of clashes between revolutions from above and from below, which means that we're trying to unravel the decisive role of social struggles in the final outcomes of all these projects. So in what follows, I will share with you some key insights from 4 of the case studies areas that we have conducted fieldwork since 2019. As I mentioned before, there are cases from across the global south and north. I haven't included everything here. So we have also done research, extensive research in London, in the Royal Docks of London, but this is not presented here. And I'm going to focus this presentation only on the aspect of impacts on nature and livelihoods that I consider quite relevant to what we have been presented so far in this panel. So the first case study is Colombo in Sri Lanka, Colombo Port City, that has been one of the most controversial infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, met from the beginning with quite major local opposition. There is an overall investment that actually consists the largest single foreign direct investment in Sri Lanka's history by Chinese state-owned enterprises. And the major aspect of this investment is the creation of a new city, Colombo Port City, that is profoundly transforming the landscape of Colombo. These will include luxury hotels, shopping malls, high-end flats, office towers, and actually there are several artistic impressions of the new city showing a cityscape comparably to Dubai or London's Canary Wharf. So the port city, as I said, has been met from the beginning with major opposition by grassroots groups and trade unionists and urban activists and fishing communities, and of course, environmentalists. And one of the key reasons for this opposition is that the project is already destroying Colombo's coastline and coral reefs and fishing breeding areas. This is posing very significant threats of erosion and flooding in an area that is prone to natural disasters, but it is also directly affecting the livelihoods of people living in Colombo's beaches and coastline, and especially of those fishing communities that are depending directly on these resources. There are, of course, other major concerns around land grabbing and dispossession and inadequate compensation for lost income because of this environmental destruction and for housing damages, and a wider criticism for the exclusive character of the project that is quite clearly targeting the upper classes, not only in Colombo, but also internationally. A major aspect of opposition in Colombo has been focused on the fact that there was no comprehensive environmental impact assessment prior to the project's approval. And there is still an ongoing debate in Colombo around this issue. So the next case is Piraeus Port in Athens, Greece, my hometown. Piraeus Port has been characterized as the head of the Dragon by the Chinese president when he visited Greece, and it has been a very quite strategic investment for China due to its geographical position that renders Piraeus a gateway for Chinese products to enter Europe. So in 2008, COSCO, a Chinese state-owned shipping and logistics suppliers company, obtained a 35 years concession from the Greek government to operate part of Piraeus container terminal. And in 2016, COSCO signed an agreement with the Hellenic Republic Asset Development Fund, a fund that has been created in Greece after the 2008 economic crisis, to acquire the majority, the 67% of the port's shares, becoming actually the primary port operator of Piraeus. Again, the privatization of Piraeus has been fought by trade unions and dock workers that have historically played a quite emblematic role in the Greek labor movement. And again, as in the case of Colombo, a major aspect of this opposition has been both the labor part that I won't analyze here, but it's a quite significant aspect in both cases, and of course the environmental impacts of the project. So just to give you an idea here, when the majority of Perez has been obtained by COSCO, this has meant throughout the last decade a major increase in the port's operations. This inter alia means an increase in noise and atmospheric pollution that has been disproportionately impacting specific neighborhood of Perez. So there are specific areas around the port that people are exposed to a 24-hour, noise and from the operations of the port. And of course, there have been severe impacts in the marine ecosystems of surrounding coasts and fishing grounds, and also quite important public health risks due to the release of hazardous waste in an area that is very, very close to primary schools, homes, and playgrounds. So currently, there was actually, because we have new development in Perez the last few weeks, I will very briefly talk to you about this. So the last 2 years, there was a master plan from COSCO to further expand the port. That it is expected, of course, to aggravate the situation, creating accumulative environmental impacts in the area. There has been a major opposition in Greece organized by environmental NGOs and the local community, a number of independent lawyers and several civil society organizations that they have managed to work with, independent experts and some research centers and obtain quite accurate measurements of the environmental impacts in the area, especially on marine ecosystems. So one major event within the pandemic in March 2020, when we had the first lockdown in Athens, was that construction work started in Perez within. Imagine that it was a time that we had a complete lockdown in Greece. You weren't allowed to get out of your house without, very specific reasons like going to a hospital or something like that. And COSCO started the expansion of the port with no strategic environmental impact assessment. So we had 2 years of quite significant fights that ended up in court. And 2 weeks ago, the Council of State, which is the higher legal institution in Greece, decided that the construction should stop and that COSCO shouldn't expand the port, because the key reason for that was that the project started without an approved strategic environmental impact assessment. I'm emphasizing this because it is a profound case of, Greece is an old member state of the European Union. It has a quite strict environmental law. Actually, it has all the EU environmental laws. All this period, all state officials were denying that this was actually happening in this port, that there was no, strategic environmental impact assessment approved. And then finally, 2 weeks ago, you have this decision from the Council of the State stopping the project. Of course, it's quite uncertain what will happen in the next few months, but right now there is no operation in Perez, which is a major event in this particular case study. So I will just give you...
If I may, I would just to remind you a little bit of time, so we can then have some time for discussion. So yeah.
Yeah. So I'm at 9 minutes from what I can see, right. Because I have a timer. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was all right. Okay, I thought it was a bit more. So sorry, probably I'm.
Yeah, I have the timer here, so I guess it's not. It's correct. So the next case study is Nepal, is Kathmandu in Nepal, and actually also a number of places around the capital city and the country in general that we have been exploring with one of my students that is based in Nepal. And I would like to say here that all the projects that have been taking places outside Europe have been, my collaborators have been people that are from these places, and I consider this extremely important actually. So field work has been taking place in the native language, has involved indigenous groups and research associates that are from these particular areas. So Nepal is again a quite paradigmatic example of the severe impacts of BRI projects. What I will just focus here on one of the flagship BRI projects in Nepal, that is the China-Nepal cross-border railway, that is actually planning to cross the Himalayas. It's a very challenging project, also from an engineering point of view, that requires actually a major invasion in the wider area. So, as most of the interviewers told us, and not only local communities, but also NGOs, environmental activists, and civil society organizations in Nepal, there was no information about the feasibility studies that have been taking place about this project, and until now there is very limited information and almost no consultation with the local communities around the possible impacts of these projects. So the train line, just to mention that, is supposed to start in Tibet and arrive to Kathmandu by crossing Inter-Alaya Langtang National Park, which is one of the last remaining habitats for the endangered snow leopard. And this is one of the key controversies in Nepal right now around the environmental impacts. Of course, we also have a number of other projects, including industrial projects and hydropower projects and new smart cities, and significant conflicts around land grabbing and destruction of agricultural land and housing. So the last case study is Chancay Port in Peru. Just to say here very quickly that again, we have COSCO operating, the same company that operates in Perez. We are talking about a new major port, 80 kilometers from Lima, Peru's capital city. And again, we have a great local opposition, primarily due to the major environmental impacts on the coastline, and that is directly affecting, as in the case of Colombo, fishing communities. So to summarize, we see in all the cases that I explored here that we have a number of major socio-environmental impacts that are affecting disproportionately local communities. We have either a complete absence or a very limited information about the impacts of these projects. And again, either a complete absence or a very limited participation in decision-making processes. And of course, major debates around the absence of proper compensation. I mean, these are very basic recommendations. There is, of course, a wider, broader discussion to be made about what was mentioned before from Eugene, this prioritization of infrastructure and urban growth and this kind of development. But at a very basic level, what people have been asking in all these cases is to have, comprehensive, effective, and sound environmental and impact assessments, because we're also missing that in all these cases, a more meaningful and inclusive public participation, and of course, and I would like to emphasize this and close with that, a clear consideration of alternatives or a cancellation of these projects from national governments, because there is no case that I explored where national governments disagreed with the projects. No? So we have a consensus. I mean, it's not just, Chinese investment in BRI projects. There's a large consensus, international and national, around these projects. Thank you, and sorry if I didn't calculate the time correctly, because I saw my timer stop now. So
it's okay. Thank you, Elia, for having brought also this perspective, which is very valuable of environmental justice, and also this last consideration about how there is a very wide shared idea of what development should entail. So regardless of where this is coming from, so there is very often a pro-development bias across the elites in many different contexts, political and social. So we can now open the floor to the discussion. There are plenty of questions which have been appearing on the on the screen of our virtual blackboard. So I will kindly ask Maman to just share the screen so we can see all of them right there. I would just, I know that Jianyu has to leave probably in 10 to 15 minutes. So we can have at most, half an hour time, because then we have to close the session a little bit and to let the other speakers for the next panel come in. But we can take this time. So I would just probably suggest, if it is possible, Maman, also on the base how you cluster this, to also engage Jianyu first in the questions, if it is possible at all, if there is any for him also, so then he can leave and we stay here with the other panelists.
Okay, so I haven't really done the clustering for the last question yet, but basically the way I did, the purple color is mostly related to how BRI works, so the mechanism and so it follows certain rules. So that's on the approach side. And then the blue one is more on communities, engagement, indigenous people and their role in development. And then the yellow one is a little bit different. So this is about whether we have the tools or is there something available. That's how I did this so far. And the last question, I'm just looking. So this, I guess this is also related to the mechanism relating to the EU. So I think probably most of the questions about the mechanism and approach of BRI would apply to both Chris and Jianyu. And maybe we can go through them a little bit. I'll actually do the oldest one first, so we can look at the blue ones first. Oh, sorry. Sorry, no, the purple ones. Yeah.
Yeah, the purple ones, and there are a couple of things. Probably I would start with the one for directly for John, right? There is the one regarding the holistic approach on the Baltoro, because he has to leave right now. So I don't know if that's okay for you.
Yes, of course. So I think you're talking about this one right here.
Yeah.
Right. So regarding the holistic approach in BRI, democratic and bottom-up policy making is one of the milestones of good governance. Where is their position of them in BRI projects? To what extent is in initiative plans the role and rights of people and communities considered? It doesn't seem they consider it at all. Okay.
No. This was shared to you, Jianyu.
Sure. Sorry for, I may have to leave earlier, so I will just jump in and also to take the opportunity to answer some of the other questions that was raised by my fellow panel members. What I'm saying is there needs to be a holistic approach to the BRI projects, but it really needs to be holistic. What I mean is the holisticity is not just from the bottom up, the people and sort of how those projects are being evaluated from the local communities. If you look at the most recent sort of guideline that was issued by the Chinese government about 2 weeks ago, actually it was the first time it was very clear that standards and approaches not only to be followed with the local sort of practices, but the projects that China is involved need to follow either the Chinese domestic standards or the standards of the sort of the best international practice, which I consider is a big step forward. But when I think the holisticity also coming from the top down, which I argue that, you know, we really need to look at, you know, I think the BRI development in the context of the green BRI development in the context of the SDGs to see whether, you know, because that's what the whole world has agreed with, right? I mean, you know, 2012, you know, 2002 in Rio, you know, all the 190 nations, they came together and agree on those principles. We really need to evaluate and look at green BRI under that context to see whether the green BRI is contributing to help to achieve that or not. Instead of just sort of pin it on a single sort of issue. And also, I think we need to be realistic and practical and look at projects both pre and post pandemic, which I think has made a huge difference. So, you know, China didn't announce the carbon peaking neutrality by 2020. Carbon didn't announce the stop, you know, overseas coal-fired power plants by 2021. I think the pandemic has really changed so many things. And actually, I am familiar with the 60 projects that was raised by the I think 260 NGOs, and that's why the Chinese government wants to establish this coalition, which I have shown you the numbers. All the household names of the NGO community, they are included in this coalition, and they have a way to voice them out. And you know, Eugene, I'll be happy to help facilitate some discussion that you have voiced. And also, you mentioned about this database. It's actually called the Green BRI Big Ecological Database, was the original intention to be established as a transparent and you know, accessible platform so that people can you know, look at you know, really what's happening and become a really hub for BRI, green BRI related information. That one is still under construction. What I can share with you is the construction sort of has lots of work underway from the inside. Probably lots of information has not been accessible from the outside, but that's definitely one of the direction that we are pushing for. Also, I mean, not every project. I mean, I think whatever the reason, there's a sort of a I think it's a sort of a mismatch of when people say BRI projects. You know, I think the fault probably should come from the Chinese government themselves, because BRI has been very loosely defined as what it is and what it encompasses. And I think that one of the sort of the way to solution to look at is really, again, in the post-pandemic and probably look at from the that's upcoming sort of third summit of the BRI development, which will give a much clearer definition. And last but not the least is you mentioned about this new, what they call the global development suggestion that was announced by President Xi last year, also during the UNGA, the UN General Assembly meeting, which I think is really being designed and at least sort of suggested as a way to you know, to deal with the new sort of the chaotic situation the whole world is facing right now. Again, that probably has not been very good implementation of that, but that definitely is a new height that Chinese government is trying to seek, you know, under this whole sort of context of the BRI development. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jiu. It's also very helpful this proposal for this synergy with Eugene as well, to facilitate a communication and that.
As a veteran member of BRICS, I would be happy finally to start some cooperation. Thank you for offering.
Yeah, please contact me. You know, we're open and we'll want to be inclusive. As I said, many of your colleagues have joined, so we'll welcome you too.
I am a representative of Biodiversity Conservation Center of BRICS for the last 3.5 years.
Okay, yeah, okay. In that semantic, right?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you exist.
All right. So this is why also we are doing this, to create this possibility for communication and more and closer cooperation. So Maman, I'm going to leave to you to prioritize the others. Sorry, I just wanted to mention this because John wrote to me that he had to leave, so to add him also a chance to comment upon. So if you wanted to prioritize and to among the other questions.
Yeah, I think we have quite a few questions for Chris, which I believe Jianyu can also answer as well regarding how BRI works, and they are connected to how the human rights groups and how activists are included, which are the blue ones. So maybe we can have some explanation around the traffic light system and the mechanisms that are in place within BRI to ensure that it's green and also inclusiveness of local communities in general, without going into each and every question.
Yeah, so to Chris.
Sure.
Yes, I think Chris first. Thank you.
All right. I think that's a good question. Overall, red project, so the traffic light system again distinguishes between red, green, and yellow projects. And red projects are defined as projects that have an environmental harm in any of the three dimensions, which are pollution, biodiversity, or climate. So if any of those environmental dimensions are kind of hurt or have negative consequences, then the project will be designated as red. And projects will be designated as green if they don't have significant harm on any of the environmental dimensions and have a significant positive impact on any of those on any of these dimensions. So to give you an example, since Eugene was also mentioning hydropower is one of the obviously very critical projects. Hydropower is considered a red project because of its high risk on biodiversity, but it can be upgraded to a kind of this red-green project, which is very interesting. This is definitely an innovation of this traffic light system. So, and it can be upgraded if it's really managed well. So all the environmental impacts are assessed and as far as possible mitigated throughout the process. So there is, of course,
example, please.
So the examples, kind of the standards that are supposed to be used is the IFC standards in this case, and you have in Pakistan one of those hydropower plants. No hydropower plant will be without environmental consequences. The question is, does it then contribute, kind of, are we minimizing the environmental harm as much as possible while we, for example, contribute to a zero carbon emission energy system? And therefore, it is, in this case, a red-green project if this is done. Similar with other linear infrastructure, so roads, rail, transmission lines, that often risk cutting through biodiversity areas. All of these projects will be categorized as red initially. And only if all, in this case, biodiversity impacts are mitigated or compensated for, can this project be considered a red-yellow or red-green project. So these are examples how this works. There is a taxonomy in there of 36 projects, and then there's also an implementation guide that shows you how to evaluate in general all types of projects, whether it's in agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. So we really put a lot of effort in kind of trying to balance. Of course, sustainable development is not just protecting the environment. Sustainable development is about the triple bottom line to provide in some economic development, social development, and safeguard environment, and ideally actually improve environment. And so we try to look at that as well. Do you want me to answer the second question on kind of social inclusion as well then?
Yeah.
So social inclusion, so projects in the BRI kind of have been, I think, as far as I understand, have been implemented in a very different way than projects, for example, of Equator Principle financial institutions or of also multilateral financial institutions. The logic of Chinese project developers is definitely informed by what's happening in China. So if within China, the government agrees to a project, the project is fine to go ahead. And there might be consultations before, but it might also be decided as a necessary project, and therefore all of the resources have to be mobilized to implement this project. And this is a tradition that I think has potentially worked well for at least the infrastructure development in China, but does not necessarily work as well in local communities in some of the other countries. This is, of course, the reason why developing financial institutions have established the safeguard mechanisms that very much focus on social inclusion, the rights of indigenous people, the rights of workers, and so on and so on. And at least in the traffic light system or the green development guidance, we have the stipulations of very strong environmental and social impact assessment, social inclusion, grievance mechanism, and also kind of reporting, which should not be underestimated. So disclosure of your environmental and social performance. So it's not sufficient to just make sure at the outset of a project that it sounds nice, but of course also how do you actually implement it over time. So this disclosure requirements is definitely something that is very interesting, and it's also being worked on. And we're also having a project going on and improving some of this disclosure mechanisms. And there's, I think without a doubt, challenges, and kind of also working with some of the Chinese SOEs that are looking to expand financing opportunities away from Chinese financial institutions to more international financial institutions. They have to very much adjust to the requirements of these international financial institutions, particularly if it's an equator principle financial institution that requires the application of the IFC performance standards, including on social aspects. So there's both on the kind of guidance side development. It's definitely, I think, so far less important than the environment, but interestingly, due to kind of different risk profiles, different risk appetites of the Chinese financial institutions, of also the Chinese reinsurance or the insurance company Sinosure, there's a kind of a need to diversify the financing sources. That ideally leads to a broader integration of environmental and social, but ideally also governance aspects. And governance is not only corruption, but also very much mentioning conflicts of interest, clear procurement issues. And so I think there's a lot of learning that still needs to happen. But I think there's overall at least a good tendency. To Eugene's point that you made before, kind of the current war and kind of the relation, kind of whether we're going to throw our environmental standards overboard. I think it's very early to tell. I think kind of let's try to hopefully avoid, kind of reduce the bellicose nature that we're kind of going down right now. I think it's in many ways promising to see that despite the situation, the publication, the new guiding opinions on greening the BRI were published in March by the 4 ministries. So at least I think there is a momentum that is, I wouldn't say it's unstoppable, definitely not. Everything is stoppable, but it hasn't been kind of reversed yet.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I think we do have a couple of other questions that you and Elias and Eugene can probably answer together. There's one here that I would like to call out. So this one is about whether the local governments are actually interested in implementing control mechanisms to assess green imprint of BRI projects. And I think this is also related to one question that was addressed to Elia on, the Greek project, whether that was an exception from the EU, or are they just violating local laws, or is the local laws indeed enforced? So I think these are related questions that maybe the three of you can all jump in and answer maybe one by one or as a discussion, as you see fit.
Should I start then, or I can also?
Yes, I think maybe we can start with this question and then move on to some of the related questions.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think since the BRI has 142 countries now, there are a lot of different governments, both on the national and subnational levels, all with different interests. I think one of the real drivers for agreeing the BRI was actually that the local stakeholder communities, together with the courts, have struck some important blows against projects that were deemed as not environmentally friendly. I think the first one that was widely reported was the Lama coal-fired power plant, which was a 1.2 billion investment, originally supported and underwritten by ICBC and implemented by Chinese construction companies. And it was already under construction. And then the courts, similar to the example that Eugene just presented from the Greek port, the courts decided it cannot go any longer because the environmental and social impact assessment is not according to the standard. And so in this case, it was more the local laws that created a lot of risks for Chinese financial institutions that had already been giving money. And so that has allowed, and there were some other cases like that, and that has allowed to value environmental risks suddenly in business decisions. Because if you don't include the environmental risk, it might haunt you later. So environmental and social impact assessments are usually done at the beginning of a project in order to minimize the risk or understand the risk. And since they have not been done in a lot of the projects, this has haunted the financial institutions and the developers. It was really expensive. And one of the reasons was, of course, that the ESIA, the Environmental and Social Impact Assessment license, is super easy to get in many countries. But it's not sufficient because the courts might strike it down. And so this has allowed the rethink of financial institutions, but also the regulator to say, it's not enough to do local ESIAs. We have to do it with international standards so it doesn't haunt us later. So I think in this case, it's a mixture of local governments, including the courts, that had a strong interest in protecting some of the environment, and then plus understanding on the Chinese side that the current system of the host country principle is insufficient to protect against some of the environmental and social risks.
Ilya and Eugene, do you want to elaborate on this and then share your perspective on these things?
Yeah, Eugene, do you want to start or me first?
Go ahead.
Okay, so just to clarify before that I think that okay, he's not here anymore, but anyway, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name of Yan Zhu. Anyway, so he's not here anymore, but he said before that there is a vagueness around BRI projects and we should be careful on which projects we refer as BRI projects and follow what the Chinese got. Anyway, so I want to say here that this is a major discussion. We don't have time to do it here, but this is something that is constantly being used as an argument when somebody starts talking about the BRI projects. Very often you hear that, well, this is not actually a BRI project. How do you know this is a BRI project? I think this vagueness is helpful many times because it allows people to exclude projects that are not sustainable or have major impacts. So just to say, for the case studies I presented and all of the work we have been doing, that all of these projects are backed up by signed memorandums of understanding between China and all these countries, and they're included in the official list of Belt and Road Initiative projects. So we are only exploring this kind of projects. Of course, there are links because the flagship project in Nepal is the railway. Of course, it is linked with industrial parks and the smart cities, even though these are not officially included in the list. I just wanted to clarify that. So there is no, at least in our approach, there is no vagueness on how we explore that and why we say that these are BRI projects. So now, yeah, I would say that it depends. I mean, there are local governments that they want to implement stricter mechanisms, or there are also local governments that they have been opposing the projects. So for example, in the case of Piraeus, all the local governments of the surrounding areas, Keratsini, Drapetsona, that there are working class neighborhoods with a long history of community mobilization. So they have been all opposing the projects, and they have even forced at some point the municipality of Piraeus, which is a right-wing, backed up by a right-wing party in Greece, and which supported all the operations of COSCO. But even the municipality of Piraeus was forced at some point from all the other local administrations to sign a common statement asking for more information about the project and about a strategic environmental impact assessment. So I would say it depends. It's a question of politics. It depends of, the agendas of local administrations and that. I think there is a related question to that. Yeah, this and another one. So if Piraeus, I don't completely, to be honest, understand what it means, a legal exception backed up by the EU. I'm not sure what this means. A legal exception, the absence of environmental impact assessment, or the fact that the constructions have stopped. So anyway, yeah. So
I guess it is about but the absence of impact assessment, because that is regulated at the European level. So
the European Union has a very unclear position towards the BRI, and it has a very unclear position also in the case of Greece. So there have been concerns because Piraeus is a quite strategic port for the Mediterranean and for Europe in general. So there were serious concerns expressed about, giving the 65% of the port to a Chinese state-owned company. But at the same time, because of the public debt in Greece, there was also, there was also an EU support towards any project that would, in a way, help Greece pay the debt. Of course, this is not the case. It's much more complicated than that. So I don't think it is a legal exception, unfortunately, because in London, in the Royal Docks, there are many similar events that have taken place. Of course, again, differently, because it's a matter of politics. So in London, there is a major process of consensus building with parts of the local community, because this is how London is. It's based, the UK, I mean, it's based a lot on consensus politics. But again, the majority of the local communities are excluded from the decisions. So I wouldn't say that this is a legal exception. We wait and see what is happening in other European countries. Piraeus was one of the first projects. It's a quite advanced project. So we can see more, of course, just to keep as a key element here that the public debt and the crisis, the severity of the crisis in Greece definitely played a role in how this particular case has been handled. Nonetheless, I think the message from Piraeus, and I think there is a question on that actually, about how, about the role of local communities, or whether, where did I see that? How these projects can become, about alternatives. Do you remember there's a question about?
Yeah, I think that is a question about the way local communities and activists can actually promote those alternatives. And I would like then, Elliot, then to, if you can have a comment on that, and then leave also to,
sure,
to Eugene this.
Yeah, so just a word on that. Yeah, I think this is the key, at least from my research. I don't undermine the role of local administration, because it can be important. Also, the role of NGOs and the role of civil society, progressive civil society organizations that fight for social, environmental justice and sustainability can be decisive. In the case of Nepal, we have this kind of human rights organizations and environmental organizations that have been extremely helpful with supportive to the indigenous groups that have been resisting the projects. But I would say that there is a decisive role for local communities and local struggles, as in every, and I would conclude with that, in every mega large-scale infrastructure project, because we shouldn't forget that the BRI is exceptional in many ways and has many particular characteristics, but it is an exemplar of almost a global hegemony of a new type of infrastructure-led development and massive infrastructure projects and mega corridors, and it is part of that. It is not just something, supported by China that differentiates from what happens. And I think Eugene mentioned very nicely the other initiatives that are now that are being announced, or I don't remember, from the US about building back better, from the EU. So we have a number of. I think the EU last month actually announced a new infrastructure, massive investment as a response to the BRI. I think it was last month or February. Yeah, thank you. I don't want to take more time.
Thank you, Elia. Eugene, you will be left with the conclusive remarks, basically, also on this and the role that communities can play. And I saw that you introduced this.
I would first say that it's important from previous set of questions that it's important to understand that we should differentiate what we mean by local governments, because, we deal with regions and countries which have very multi-layered systems of government.
Yeah.
But in general, especially talking about national governments, the experience shows that they have low interest and low expectations in cooperation with China as a source of green and sustainable development. To the extent that I've never heard about a government producing any comments or suggestions to these green guidances, which now are so plentiful in the Chinese policy scene, even when those were put at for the public comment. And I never heard about Chinese authorities actually putting such draft documents intentionally to the discussion of their BRI partners. You see what I'm saying? So it's not the central part of that discourse and that interaction. And this is a major important thing, because Chinese government knows too well that most governments along the BRI are very ill prepared to cooperate on green development. And it's actually additional pain in the neck to make them do so, which Chinese government does not need, or Chinese actors do not necessarily have capacity to do. You see what I'm saying? Therefore, in certain extent, all this green BRI is a little bit a theoretical construct, which actually is not supported by actual dynamics of current cooperation and ways they cooperate and discuss policies. As for local communities, yes, there are many examples as local communities were able to prevent bad projects or partly prevent bad projects. And in my memory, there is only one example when more or less accidentally, in my practice, the bad project was replaced by a much better project. That was in Mongolia, which where Exim Bank of China canceled the Agin Gol hydropower projects in the basin of Lake Baikal and put part of this money into construction of very much needed wastewater treatment plant in the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar. And that's about the only example I can come up with. Of course, if we look around, there will probably be others, but this is the only explicit one. And it's not such clear-cut example, because then they put another part of that money and put in the next very bad hydropower project. But still, there are such, I know at least one example when it happened, but that was not the initiative of local communities. That was an interplay of local communities along with many other actors, preventing the first project, hydropower project, from happening, and then the necessity to reallocate resources to something that was not, this decision to reallocate these resources likely had no involvement of civil society.
Thank you, Eugene, for sharing. Yeah, for sharing this case. I think, you know, we need to now to move to the next panel. I mean, we can stay in this room, but I would like to first take you know, just a minute to just to tell you that I'm super happy, you know, with the very rich harvest that we had in this panel, and those the discussion which has been unfolding is always very, you know, it's one of the reasons why we designed this panel as such was to allow for a discussion between very different visions about this green Belt and Road thing, and I think we managed to do so to some extent, because we have very different perceptions of what it is and what it entails, and what are actually the shortcomings of it. I think, and so I would like to thank you, really, all the speakers, and you know, in the next panel we are going basically to continue discussing what is the role and can be the role of civil society and local communities, you know, on a wider set of cases, not only the Belt and Road initiative, but on a much wider scale, I would say. And so, yeah, I think we have now to leave the space to the other. I want to thank also all the participants, of course, for the questions. So, Ali, panel. So, you know, it was worth the extra time we took to stay together here, and I'm very grateful for this. I'm very happy how it worked out. And I think, you know, we started yesterday by looking at the very general, you know, overview of big structures also, which are in a way shaping green finance. And then over the time, and you know, between yesterday and today, then we came down really to the lived realities of communities, and it has been quite a journey, I think, in these 2 days. And at some point, we actually were losing faith a little bit, especially, I think, yesterday at the end of the panel with Giulia, and a little bit this morning, you know, the early morning. I have to say, well, here, you know, the thing that you have been sharing, not only, you know, all of your experience and also positive, you know, examples and about alternatives, I think it is very important, and it is just the best possible way, I think, to close this couple of days of work about this topic. So thank you, really, I really appreciated that. And yeah, you know, I hope that this is going to be just, you know, the beginning of you know, of being engaged to each other in a way, you know, to try and reflect on these things. And I think, you know, my gut feeling about this, I sense there is a lot to be shared yet, and so I'm very confident about this. And thank you again for your contributions. As a general note to you and to the participants, as we were saying also yesterday at the start of the workshop, we are going to share a report, a brief report, and about this. I know that Ali, also you were talking about this within the consortium, and so it's going to take some time. But when ready, of course, we are going to share this, and also the recordings of all the panels will be available. So we have to process that a little bit, but then hopefully next week already they will be available to participants. And yeah, this is all I had to share about, you know, how we are going to be. Of course, we are going to be in touch also for other initiatives we have on these issues in the future months and years. So thank you again, guys, for being part of this, and
thank you for taking time. I hope to see you in person. Thank you.
Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao. Bye bye. Namaste.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. I mean, you can go to sleep again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
because it was very yeah.
It was 4 a.m. actually there.
Ah, it was 4 a.m. Wow.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, right.
Thank you, Sergio.
Right.
Okay, just
probably I was just here. I think Giulia left.
Yeah, Giulia left, and Okay, we can go and spend some time with the families, and then we can find time this afternoon to talk if you want. If you
yeah, this afternoon,
yeah.
I probably need to tend to run some errands.
Okay.
And so I'm not going to be available for our meeting. So I would suggest you, well, first of all, it was super good, everything. So, you know, it's, I think it was,
the first panel was wonderful. Ijan and Ilya was wonderful there. The confetti ruined the VRI, and I really love it. It was fantastic.
You know, different, I think
we should
Eugene is still
stop
here.
recording.
Yeah, exactly. Stop the recording, and then probably I'm going to stop the recording.